and everyone on their way in. When I went out to say it's time to start coming in, someone said, "Oh no, we're not too scary." It's my privilege to welcome you to the Mind Body Wellness Center. We've been a part of Meadville Medical Center and the community of Meadville since 1997. We're here to serve both your preventive and wellness needs, and it's our privilege to interact with you every opportunity we can, and to take an opportunity to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend with us. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Kathy Berkey. She has been with Mind Body Wellness Center about 8.5 years. She earned her doctorate and finished up her residency and became a licensed psychologist during that time. And she's here to share with you some of the recent interests that she's had and a growing concern among our population. Dr. Kathy Berkey.
Well, I'm pretty informal, and I'd like this to be somewhat informal, but there's so much to present that I know I'm just going to kind of blow through that. Jamie is going to hand out just some of the basic handouts that I want to give to you, so you don't have to write if you want to know some of these things. With as many people as came or signed up, decided not to do all these PowerPoint slides because a lot of them are just pictures, and then I'll talk to you. So if there's anything that you want after this that isn't included in those handouts, you can let me know. But I certainly welcome you here. I hope we can learn a lot of things in a short amount of time in a topic that we could probably be here until midnight, I think. Now, I have no idea why you've come, what brings you here, but I would imagine that in some way your life, as all of ours have been, has been touched by self-absorption. And even though that's sometimes hard to define, we could talk about how is that lived out in somebody's life. When you think about self-absorption, many times we all exhibit some of those characteristics and tendencies, don't we? Yeah. How many think that we're becoming more self-absorbed? And we'll talk about that in a minute, because that would be an interesting discussion for an hour that we don't really have time for. But how do we identify the way that self-absorbed people come across interpersonally? That's that's the greatest effect, whether it's at home, whether it's somebody you're married to, whether it's somebody you're dating, whether it's somebody you work with, or if you're a parent. So we're going to talk about all those different relationships and how it's lived out a little bit, and just kind of skim across the top. I think about wetting your whistle. Just give you a little bit to think about, and then more of this can be pursued some other time. But it is, and I'm just keeping my notes in front of me because I have attention deficit disorder, unmedicated. So I have to keep myself in line, and I do that with PowerPoint and notes. Otherwise, I could get off on all kinds of tangents and tell all kinds of stories that are interesting, but they take too long. I gave you a handout on some annoying behaviors of people that are self-absorbed. It can be anything from impatience in traffic, that would be moi, or it could be just the way you talk to people, the way you are interested only in what you're interested in, and if I change the topic to talk about something I'm interested in, you're going to glaze over. Just little things, because we can all look at ourselves, and I believe that we all ought to look at ourselves on a pretty much day-to-day basis and say, wait a minute, do these things apply to me? I have often said that one of my greatest fears is that these disorders apply to me, and no one will tell me. I'm uninformed because they just don't have the guts to tell me. One of the greatest skills that we can all have is self-awareness and self-observation, of being able to stand back and say, you know what, I need to pay attention to this. Maybe I'm a little bit more self-absorbed than I thought. If you are doing that, and if you ask yourself a question, am I self-absorbed, am I narcissistic, you're not as bad as you could be, because you're at least asking the question. What we'll find out is that people who are on the farthest end of that scale almost never ask that question, and they have almost no insight into it whatsoever. So we will talk about that. But on that first handout, just little behaviors that have to do with self-absorption. These really are at the lower end of the scale. Everything, everywhere from slightly annoying and self-absorbed, all the way up to what we're going to focus the most on, and that's going to be narcissism. How many of you are familiar with a definition of narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder? Yeah, we all pretty much know what that is. But I want to look at it. I want to take us to that end of the scale and primarily focus on that so that we understand what is this animal that we're talking about. What probably concerns us the most is when we run into people who are on that farthest end of that perspective or on that spectrum. And let's see, just in terms of time. Oops, that's not it. Hit the wrong button. When you live with someone or interact with them, how do we identify what are the greatest problems that exhibit themselves when you get to the kind of abnormal thinking, abnormal behaving, abnormal processing in attitudes, beliefs, behaviors that characterize narcissism? When we think about it being on the rise, is there anybody here who thinks it isn't on the rise? Because it's okay. How many of you are not sure? Yeah, it's hard to tell. And interestingly enough, the research disagrees here and there on whether it is or whether it isn't on the rise. There are people who, for instance, in this book, The Narcissism Epidemic, really what they're saying is they used a measure of narcissism and said that since the 1980s, it has, in a sense, exploded among younger people. And we could think, what are some of the contributing factors to that? It might be Facebook, it might be selfies, it might be... How many of you think that the current generation, the younger generation, is more self-absorbed than earlier generations? And then I could say, well, how old are you? Because the younger generation might not think that. I think more popular belief seems to be that there is an increase in that and that the younger generation is more self-absorbed. Why do you think that? Anybody want to offer a couple of comments on what makes you think that?
Well, I think the addiction to the cell phone, if you're in a classroom situation, it is, unless you say you cannot have your cell phones out, it is almost impossible to reach students.
Okay.
And if you tell them that they can't, they have very unique ways of being able to text from their pocket, which is phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else?
I think with a lot of things, it seems like just with the media today and everything being there from texting and Facebook and selfies and Twitter, I think just the ability to see people's level of self-absorption is there that wasn't there in the past.
And what is conveyed in the media? What are the images that they're seeing? What's being projected as how life is and how it ought to be?
And I think that just brings more of a disconnection.
And there are any number of things that we could talk about, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the work ethic is, with our youth, is defined in the sense of entitlement is increased,
Okay,
leading to more of a me generation.
okay. There has been some conjecture that the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of religious institutions, and, you know, I look at that and I think, where did I learn about others? Sunday school, things like that. And I can remember when I was growing up, even when you talk about changes in parenting. I know I'm old, but I also think that we have a breakdown in parenting. Part of it is parents are busy. Are they always legitimately busy? Not so much. We now have a generation of parents that are pretty self-absorbed, and their attention paid to their children in that parenting isn't there. And when we think about one of the things that is very key to someone not becoming so self-absorbed and not becoming so narcissistic is empathy, the ability to walk in somebody else's shoes, to feel what they feel. And I can remember my mother, and I was young, taking me by the face, young, and saying to me, do you understand how somebody else might feel in this situation? And as a child, I thought, no, and I'm not sure that I care. But as a parent, she taught me to think about somebody else's perspective by taking me by the chin and making me think that through. Now, that's one of a million times that parenting occurred from one or the other of my parents to make me take that perspective of somebody else. I read a statistic that there is a direct correlation between the number of friends somebody has on Facebook and the level of narcissism. How many people? And sadly enough, I remember talking to a woman who was getting a divorce, and she said, my husband has 300 friends on Facebook, not one of which he can pick up the phone and call and say, this is where I'm at. And if you have 500 friends on Facebook, what does that necessarily mean? But for younger generations, what does that mean? And what do we do on Facebook? We put our best experiences, we put our best pictures, we put the self that we project many times on Facebook is our best self. And then what do our 150 to 500,000 friends do? I like it. I got 97 likes on that picture that I put on there. What is that doing? We don't know yet. It's just, we have no idea where all of that is going. But when we think about how these things develop, there are any number of theories of how it happens, and I'll come back to that. Just real quickly, when we think about people, our personalities develop over time. Obviously, we are a combination. How that's all taken place can be genetics, it can be environment, it can be temperament, personality. I know my niece, I have two situations that come to mind that have been excellent experiences for me on a very personal level. I have a very good friend who is 10 years older than me or so, who was deeply, deeply wounded in childhood. And I have watched this lived out in his life all the years that I've known him. And you'll find him here in a little bit when I talk about people who become narcissistic out of pain and abuse and rejection and neglect. Others become, I'm getting ahead of myself, so I won't. My niece is currently in the process of a divorce from a man who has an IQ of 154, and he will tell you that as often as you will listen to him tell you. And there isn't quite anybody on earth except those who belong to Mensa who would really understand him. And he has said to her, I'm sorry that you cannot live up to my expectations. And it has deeply wounded her being in a relationship with him for 14 years. His children, he thought that was going to make him happy 8 years ago when they started having kids, and they have 2. But that's not made him happy either, and that's on down the line too. But I can talk about that. They don't even live in the state. But she's raising 2 boys, one of which, the 5-year-old, is so much like his father in temperament and personality that she knows she's going to have to work very hard with that younger one to teach him empathy, because she can see it already. And if we don't catch this stuff early, the longer and the farther it goes, the harder it is to make any changes. Yes? Yes, I believe that we can. And part of it is to adults if they want to know. It's very hard to teach even if they do want to know, because this is hard wiring stuff. And some people have a hard time with it just because they were born that way. It's just hard for them to understand where somebody else is coming from. And that's why I'm a firm believer in let's do something about the hard wiring when people are younger to try to catch this early. Whether it's urging, parents to come back and learn these skills themselves. How can you model something for your children that you don't know how to do yourself? You can't. Schools can't do it. They're trying. They're trying in anti-bullying campaigns and things like that to combat this stuff. But primarily it's got to be done on a day-to-day basis in the environment the child's in for a long period of time. But it's a challenge to all of us to think, how can we intervene? How can we make this better for children? But we are all a combination, obviously, of all these positive and negative personality traits. In psychology, we've talked about the big 5 personality factors. And these are just basic dimensions of personality that go together to make us who we are. And there is a range on each one of these. And our behavior comes out of the combination of how these things go together. Oops, I hit the wrong one every time. The first one is openness, and it's just curiosity, creativeness, openness to new ideas, and it can be anywhere from openness to closed. We're going to find ourselves somewhere on there. And you can look all this stuff up online. That's what I love about the internet. That's the part I love. Conscientiousness, organized, systematic, achievement-oriented, extroversion, anywhere from introversion to extroversion, where people are sociable, they enjoy social situations. I am basically an introvert. People don't necessarily always believe that, but I am, I always have been, I always will be. Agreeableness, sometimes that's just what it says. A cigar is just a cigar. You're just agreeable, more tolerant, more sensitive, more trusting. This is on one end of the scale, and the other end are the opposite of these things. Neuroticism, anxious, irritable, temperamental. So when you put all these combinations of things together in these big 5 personality factors, it becomes who we are. And when we think about children, I listen to, when we talk about personality disorders, on this end of the scale, as we put our personality traits together, we could develop what has been in the past called a personality disorder. So that in our diagnostic manual, which I have mixed thoughts about, because at our very best we are labeling things, the best that we know. Do we really understand it? We understand it about this well. When I was first in school, which was 100 years ago, the diagnostic manual, it was the DSM-2, that's how old I am, it was about that thick, it was about that big. I mean, you could read it in 2 hours. Not so much anymore. Now, this means that we do understand things better, but we also it just gets deeper and more complex as we go. So trying to understand personality disorders, there are various personality disorders. Narcissistic personality disorder is the extreme end of self-absorption, to make it simple. And it's an enduring pattern. This begins, you can see patterns of it developing in late adolescence, early adulthood, and it becomes a kind of an inflexible way of dealing with the world. Many times it is borne out in the most negative ways, in interpersonal social interaction. That's where we see it. That's where the greatest pain comes out. If I lived all by myself, I could be as crazy as I wanted to be, and it wouldn't affect anybody. But this is a social world. Typically leads to distress or impairment. Now, I heard somebody speak, and I thought it was great, talking about the diagnostic manual and talking about personality disorders because they've talked about maybe eliminating that category. It helps us understand things, but it is, after all, just a category. And one of the things that I liked about what this guy said was, many children grow up in homes that are neglectful, abusive. The parenting is at best sporadic, unpredictable, and they have to what? They have to survive. So they learn how to cope, one way or the other. And we just have to fly by the seat of our pants sometimes as children. I was fortunate not to have to do that. But many, many people do. They have to cope. So based on their personality and who they are, they learn to cope. It coalesces over time into their personality. And those coping skills and who they are and how they learned how to deal with life and deal interpersonally, we drag it into adulthood and we do the same stuff and we cope the same ways because it's all we know. And then I come along and I label that a personality disorder. You have a personality disorder. When really, you have just simply learned to cope years ago. And now it has become ingrained. And then we label it something. Now, when we think about this narcissistic personality disorder, most of us know that comes from the Greek mythology of Narcissus. We don't have time for the story, but basically he fell in love with his own reflection in a pool of water and died a lonely man. So that's where that comes from. You can look that up. But with narcissistic personality disorder, and I talk about this as the extreme end of it, so that depending on what situation you might be facing in your own life, you can scale that back. Only about 1% of the population is diagnosed with a personality or with a narcissistic personality disorder. But grandiosity is the essential feature, and then a lack of empathy, inability to walk in somebody else's shoes, is a very major characteristic of that also. And 50 to 75% of those diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder are males, men. Now, that's questionable also because women are socialized not to behave like this. So some of the same dynamics are probably lived out in what we now call borderline personality disorder. So for women, we're more there, men are more here, but we have some of the same stuff going on underneath. So, and also they rarely seek treatment. But in your handouts, I gave you, my thumb is not useful. At the top of that page are the I don't want to forget the notes and just talk. At the top of that page are the diagnostic criteria from the diagnostic manual. This is out of 4, not the 5, but it's pretty much stayed the same. So that these are the official symptoms that we would look at to see if somebody had a personality disorder. It's not something that we can just go around and slap that label on somebody. And I would have, for instance, if I did that, I'd have to see somebody for quite a while to know whether that really fit them or whether it didn't. As well as I know my niece's husband over all these years, I don't know whether he does. He has very strong narcissistic traits. So whether he has a disorder or not, I don't know. But I also gave you other symptoms, other things to think about as far as whether somebody would fit that category. Although this is no way to make a diagnosis, and I just want to really emphasize that. But it gives you more to think about in terms of what those characteristics are. Requires excessive admiration and attention. Exploitive of other people. You are what is often termed, you would be part of the narcissistic supplies. If you have something that I want or need, I'm interested in you. It doesn't matter whether you're a coworker or whether you are a love interest or whether you are a friend or whether you are in some other capacity. If you have something that I can make use of and that will somehow fit me or work for me, then I might be interested in you. When you no longer have something that I can use, no longer are one of my narcissistic supplies or a part of my supplies, I'll probably ditch you. And I could do that in a heartbeat. You might have encountered someone who, when you are no longer of use to them, they can click you off like a ballpoint pen and seem to feel nothing. Because sadly enough, in fact, they feel nothing. It's not there. The attachment, the connection, that feeling is not there. It's maddening for people who are in relationships like that. Extremely painful, and we'll get to that in a minute. Obviously, haughty, arrogant, center of attention, preoccupied with outward appearance. It's how I look. Look at me. Am I not wonderful? Am I not a prize of some sort? A trophy? academically, physically, professionally. I might show off my children, I might show off my spouse, but it's basically, look at me. There are two major theories where we talk about what are some of the contributing factors. And these are, I'm only going to touch on two because there are many other things that contribute to someone developing this. Parenting style and feelings of inferiority. And when we talk about parenting style, the first parenting style that can contribute to it, obviously, is the overindulgent and pampering parent. These are the people, the coach fathers and the stage mothers, where the child is the center of attention. They are on stage, they are paraded. Many times the parents live through their children, or they expect academic success. They want them to be super achievers, but they are taught from day one that they are the center of the universe. And we think that's going to change. It really doesn't change. It is becoming who they are. And when they get older, we think they are no longer going to be the center of the universe. Obviously, childhood and adolescence is a time of self-absorption. They're pretty self-absorbed when we are children and adolescents. How do we grow out of that? If you grew out of it, how did that happen? If you grew up and it was no longer all about you, how did that happen? And with some people, when they are the prize, they just never grow out of it. They have to find somebody then later who will keep them in that position as the worshipped one. So the other part of the theory is a neglectful, rejecting, abusive parent. And one of the things that can happen here is that obviously as a result of that, a child is going to end up with low self-esteem. And many people believe, it's certainly not across the board, there's a difference of opinion as to whether the children who are the prize, for instance, my niece's going to be ex-husband, who has been Mr. Mensa and Mr. 154 IQ. His father is also in the genius category. And Anne can remember her mother-in-law saying to her one time, a few years ago, "Nobody understands what it's like to be married to a genius." And now Anne is looking back thinking, I wonder what that's been like for her. I wonder how similar it is. Has the apple fallen far from the tree? And she's now looking at it with clearer eyes and realizing that she's lived in a very emotionally abusive situation for a long time. That's taken a great toll on her. And she just lived it from the time she was young in college. It's all she knew. And has just been drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit along the way. And she never talked to us. I would have shot him. She never talked to me about it, or I would have been yakking in her ear a long time ago. But she kept all those things to herself. And don't we tend to do that? We live with it. You might be ashamed of it. You might feel bad about it. You start to feel bad about yourself. We don't talk about those things. So the other parenting style is when children truly grow up and they have poor self-esteem, and they many times try to compensate for it by overachieving. And that ties into the other major theory of no matter how someone started out with feelings of inferiority, they're simply trying to compensate for that shame and those bad feelings deep inside. Of feeling flawed and defective on a level that might be below our own consciousness. Many times people feel flawed and defective, and it's not even in their conscious awareness. It's that deep internal verdict that you have yourself that you might even hide from yourself. We hide that from other people, but we might also be hiding it from ourselves. And sometimes when people become so grandiose and they seek that attention and they seek that reassurance that they are somebody or they are something or they are worthwhile, and it's all about them, it can be trying to feed that emptiness inside. So that's one of the major theories. How do I know? How can I find that out? And we're going to focus more on relationships now. And I just put a few things up here. There are a number of ways to try to assess that even in your own mind. the Narcissistic Personality Inventory. And I Xeroxed one of these off, or I printed one of these off just to have an idea of what some of the questions are. And you can take some of these things online. This was developed not to diagnose narcissistic personality disorder, but for research purposes. And it's 40 pairs of questions. And for each pair, you should select the one that best reflects your personality. And what they have figured when they do, I'm trying to think what the average score was. It's in my notes. I'm not going to try to find it. But if you have 29.9 out of 40, then you score higher on this assessment device than 95% of the population. So if you score 30 in the narcissistic zone, then you're getting high up there as far as how much narcissism is evident in your life. And there are just things like, one choice might be, being an authority doesn't mean that much to me. The other choice is, people always seem to recognize my authority. One is, I would prefer to be a leader. The other is, it makes little difference to me whether I'm a leader or not. One choice is, I'm going to be a great person. I hope I'm going to be successful. So you see little nuances there. Now,
You have to pick one or the other.
You have to pick one or the other. Whichever one on that scale seems to fit you the most. And it's self-scoring, but yeah.
Can you get a copy of that test, or is it online?
It's online. Narcissistic Personality Inventory, it's online, yeah.
Isn't it possible, because narcissists are quite intelligent,
Many, many times.
and if they know they're taking a test on are you a narcissist, they'll know how to answer the questions, so it'll come up that they're
That's possible. That's possible. But interestingly enough, let me add this. What they found out was that you can take one question. If you have a group of people, you can take one question and you can ask a narcissist to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 7. I am a narcissist. To what degree, on 1 to 7, do you think you're a narcissist? And reliably, they will tell you, I am a narcissist. And it can, now nothing is across the board, nothing. These are just rough ideas. But what they found interesting, and they've done several studies with this, like 2,200 people, that you can actually replace that whole 40-item inventory with one question and get just about as reliable a result. If you just ask one question, are you a narcissist? 1 to 7. Mike, Anne's husband Mike, that I've been talking about, looked at her on his way out the door and basically said, I know I'm an asshole, but everyone loves me for that. He was not kidding. The sad thing is he was not kidding. He's aware of it, but everyone loves me for it. I'm thinking, if I worked with him and I was underneath him, I don't think so. If I'm married to him, I don't think so. I know his children, I don't think so. But interestingly enough, and I don't have this up here anywhere, so this is just an aside, what they do many times is recruit what's been lovingly called flying monkeys. So that if you are the only person that I'm talking to about me and I'm the narcissist, I can sell you any bill of goods that I want to. How many times have you known somebody, let's say somebody who is, because often they can be very high achievers. Mike works for Price Waterhouse. He is a genius. He's a computer genius. He's climbing the ranks. He's making the money. He loves it. He loves to travel across the world, blah, 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 blah. He found a life that just isn't quite as boring as marriage and family. But if you talk to him and you had nobody else as a reality check, he could convince you that can be quite charming. He can convince you that he's one of the nicest people in the world. You would love him. How many times do we know people that are high up in the community? Over the years, their husbands or wives, more often wives, will come in and say, everybody loves my husband. They think he's great. They don't live with him. Yeah, they don't live with him. And they can recruit any number of flying monkeys who will think that they're wonderful and and believe what they have to say. So it can be very challenging for the people who are living with them because John Q. Public doesn't see what you might be living and the toll that it might be taking on your life. But interestingly enough, they're so proud of it, they will typically tell you. If you ask a group, if you're a narcissistic, please stand up, there are many that will. So thank you for bringing that up, because if you want to lie on something, you can. If I don't want you to know that I'm narcissistic, yes, it's pretty evident. On those questions, yes.
In my experience, other people wouldn't see this person the way I know this person to be.
Right.
Which is very frustrating.
Very. Oh.
There's a wonderful other thing you don't really know.
Exactly. And I think what's hard for my niece Anne is that because Mike's IQ is so high, and he is a genius, he chooses every word perfectly. He's one of the best manipulators I've ever seen and extremely effective at it. And what she was saying is, now this is funny, she said, how am I going to find an attorney or a judge who isn't so narcissistic themselves that they're not going to go after him? Well, the other thing that I included on one of those pages was just, I should lay this out on something else. I just put this white page in there just to give you ideas of, of questions you can ask yourself or things that characterize dealing with a narcissist and living with one. Does this person act as if life revolves around them? You just get the gist of it. So I'm going to switch a little bit. When you think about this, obviously, if somebody is on the high end of the scale and really has a narcissistic personality disorder, or they're getting into that range, being in a relationship with them, whether it's professional, personal, friend, whatever, parent, child, it's going to be tough. And you do feel like you're walking on eggshells. It's a hard road to walk. So we're going to start off with romantic relationships. If you're, because this affects a lot of you, and this is where the pain takes place. There are no ends to the way that if you are in a relationship, a close relationship with, or a romantic partner, or a spouse with somebody who is narcissistic, there are no ends to the ways that they can hurt you. Because many times they will hook up with somebody who is very sensitive, caring. You're okay. You understand that. You empathize. You turn yourself inside out trying to create a workable relationship with somebody like this. And they can, in innumerable ways, harm you. Now, if you're dating someone, characteristically, obviously, they can be charming. They'll sweep you off your feet. Fulfill all your romantic fantasies. Lavish gifts, lavish dates, think about you on every hand, make all these phone calls to you, send you text messages, make you the center of the world to win you. You are a potential narcissistic supply, so it's all about getting you because I'm attracted to you, I think I want something with you. So I'm going to invest whatever it takes to get you. It's deceptive. They tend to dominate the conversation. They can do one of two things, either talk a lot or not talk. But when they dominate the conversation, what you can many times find out is they will either seek to get information from you, which they will then maybe use later against you. They're learning about you. But they lack empathy, so they can easily harm you later. Or you will find that as long as you're talking about something that they're interested in, that's fine. But you start to talk about yourself or something that really doesn't mean anything to them, and they glaze over. When you're talking about them, they become animated, they're all about that, and take an interest in them. Whirlwind romance. It's not uncommon for them to pull you in quickly. It goes quickly. It might go quicker than you want it to go. And they take great delight in, if you put the brakes on and say, wait a minute, romance, it's not uncommon for them to pull you in quickly. It goes quickly. It might go quicker than you want it to go. And they take great delight in, if you put the brakes on and say, wait a minute, this is going too fast, they take great delight in trying to change your mind. It's conquering, part of it is. And they can be very seductive. One of the things that is typically common in relationships with narcissists is that it will be a very intense sexual relationship. It is a conquest. It'll move quickly, and they will do everything they can to convince you to go in the direction that they want you to go. Now, that can be that's a pretty heady experience. That you can feel very loved and treasured, and this guy is really head over heels for me. And do you know what you're getting into? Heavens no. That comes later. Now, if you're married to someone, the one thing that is very common, I'm going to get this because it's easier. The false image projection, that's the best picture I think we could put up there. When you start to disappoint them, one of the things that they tend to do when they're involved with you initially is idealize you. They see you as the best self. You are wonderful. You're somebody who can make my life wonderful. Over time, can any of us live up to that? Nope. I remember a college professor saying in undergrad, you're not prepared to live together until you're prepared to live alone. And many times these people they're rather empty inside. They want you to make them happy. None of us can do that. You will begin to disappoint them. You're not going to live up to their expectations. You're not going to fulfill their dreams. You're not going to be the person that they idealize you to be. And the change starts to begin, or once the honeymoon is over, however long that takes, that change will begin. Now, most people that are in a relationship with somebody like this, when you look back, did you see signs of that? Yeah, pretty much did. Did I see it then? No, it doesn't jump out at you, but it will over time. Everything is about him or her. If they're interested in doing it, you're going to do it. If they're not interested in doing it, you can't do it either. You want a girls' night out? I'm not watching the kids. I've got things to do, or they will do things even to sabotage something like that. They get home late. It's too late for you to go. They really want your attention and your time and your feet nailed to the floor. But if it's something they want to spend money on, if it's an amusement park they want to go to, if it is some social occasion that they want to attend, fine. It will be their friends. It will be their interests. It will be what they want to budget money for. Now, sometimes it's not always that easy to see, but in the long run, you see the pattern. Constant needs for attention and admiration. That's unending. With people who are, for instance, my friend who was deeply wounded as a child, has been very successful. And I have looked at him and said, is it ever... Now, this guy's got some insight, thankfully. And his empathy is great in some ways. And in other ways, I'm thinking, wow, how can you not see this? How can you not feel this? So it's a real mix in that situation, but it's been a real learning experience for me. But I have said to him, when will it ever be enough? When will it convince you that you are worthwhile? And he will look at me and say, probably never. Because this stuff that deeply wounds people in childhood, man, it doesn't go away. I think we can work at it, and people do change, and he has changed over time. But there has to be some insight, and many times that's missing. Unable to feel empathy, we've talked about that, so that even when they hurt you, are they ever going to apologize for it? No, they don't feel it. For many of you, you might be thinking, that's just hard to imagine. But the wiring is not there. And that's hard for any of us to get into those shoes and think, how do you just not feel? How do you just not attach? They don't care about your feelings, your thoughts, your ideas, so that when you do share things with them, it's minimized, it's dismissed. You can tell, lots of times they're not even listening to you when you're talking about it because it's really not that interesting to them. And then, if you talk about concerns about the relationship, look out, because that's very threatening. And when they are threatened, you're going to meet with anger, irritability. they are going to in some way let you know that it is unacceptable to talk about something. What? You are complaining about me? They're not going to let you do that in one way or another. And so typically what will happen is people will just shut down. You learn not to talk about things because you know it's going nowhere good. It's not going to accomplish anything. Talk to the hand. They're not open to it. And then what do? They turn around and say, when they have an affair with someone else, we never talk. You never talk to me. But no one has lived what you have lived to the point where you just get quieter and quieter and quieter because a discussion is not something that you have. The fault is always going to be yours. No question about it. You are going to be the one at fault. Even if he hurts you or she hurts you, that's still your fault. If you hadn't said that, if you hadn't done that, you're too sensitive, you take things too personally, everything is dismissed. It will always come back to being your fault. Now, how can any human being live if all the time it's your fault? That is a systematic diminishing of another person. Just like sandpaper. It will wear you away until by the time you're done, you are struggling to have a sense of self yourself. Because it just takes a toll on you a little at a time. But it's almost imperceptible. Like the story of boiling a frog to death. Put it in a pan of cold water, slowly heat it up. By the time it realizes that water's hot, it's too cooked to jump. And many times that's true for people. They will put you down to build themselves up, constantly making comparisons, whether it's you or someone else. I know my niece's husband, Mike, his sense of humor that she has always hated is always about making comments about other people. Caustic, sarcastic comments about other people. He thinks that's a great sense of humor. It's hurtful. But because he doesn't have empathy, who cares? Somebody's on the receiving end of that? Oh well, they're too sensitive. They just take things too personally. I'm only kidding. So, and a corollary to the fault will always be yours is that the rules don't apply to them. Even social rules. They'll live by those if they want to. The law, they will keep the law if they want to. But they are above that. They are superior. They don't have to listen to that kind of stuff. So, let's say you get an invitation to go to someone's house for dinner. It's not someplace he wants to go. You might say yes anyway because that's the give and take of social law. He only does it if he wants to go because that give and take in relationships isn't there. It's truly just one way in their minds. Control is an absolute obsession. They have to control everything. I mean everything. And giving you control creates fear in them. If you challenge their control, it's met with anger. And that goes along with it's all about them and they want it their way and they want to do what they want to do and they want to go where they want to go and it's their timetable and I'll get home when I want to get home and this is what we're going to do and these are the people that we're going to be with and it's just control, control, control. And you get to be the loser. And that comes back to walking on eggshells. We talked about that. That's a hard way to live. You start to wonder, what if I say this? What if I do that? Because you cannot predict very adequately. Even when you try to know somebody, you can't predict very well what's going to set them off next. Because their expectations are theirs. This is how I think it ought to be. This is how you ought to act. This is what you ought to be doing. If you cared about me, you would this. If you didn't care about me, you would that. You have to try to read their minds. You make mistakes all the time. Walking on eggshells. Many times people will end up with problems with anxiety, depression, whatever, because you're living with them. And then, in the end, many times, not always, but they will move on to someone else. And for many people who are very narcissistic, they're with you for a season. But when you no longer meet those needs and I'm disillusioned with you or I'm tired of you because they get bored pretty easily, I'll move on to someone else. Now, let's switch to parenting. And I don't have a whole lot up here. This is a whole different thing that we won't take too much time on because of time. But obviously children are very vulnerable as they are growing up. Their brains are developing, their personalities are developing. And when you have a narcissistic parent, typically that parent will only smile upon that child when that child mirrors back to them what they want. You think what I want you to think. You say what I want you to say. You believe what I want you to believe. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your personality is. It doesn't matter what you're good at. This is what I want you to do. This is the sport I want you to be in. These are the people that I want you to hang around with. This is the school I want you to go to. And who that child, in a sense, was born to be doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter. They're simply an extension of the parent and who the parent fantasizes that child to be. And obviously there are we talked about that, parents who live through their children. And how often, you as an adult cannot live up to the expectations of a narcissist. How can a child? My niece faced that with her older son, Michael, who is 8. He blamed himself, typically, of children, he blamed himself for the divorce for about 3 months before he would tell her. And she finally wangled it out of him because he had finally said, it's not Dad's fault, it's not your fault, it's not Andrew's fault. Well, that leaves Michael. So he finally said, it was because it's my fault because I'm trying to think, there were 2 things. One of which was he accidentally hit his dad one time, but it was purely by accident. And he was the child that when Mike would get mad, he would tell Michael, you're stupid. And Michael has said to Anne, I'm stupid. Now, he's in 2nd grade now, and he's in the gifted program. He's far from stupid. But he has taken that on over time, and she has tried to get in between them and do the damage control when Mike simply expounds what he thinks and projects his anger. Chronic low self-esteem, never good enough. How many of you have ever heard of Alice Miller's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child? You might want to jot that down. It's not an easy read, but it really is about not giving a child an opportunity to become who they are and how that takes place. It's an excellent book. It's been out a long time, kind of a classic, but of the pain that children go through when who they are gets squashed, when the only time they get that parent's approval and attention, and the only time the parent has bright eyes for them is when that child is simply mirroring what the parent wants, but not who they are. Now, narcissism in the workplace. We never encounter this very often, but I'm just kidding. Some of you might be here because that's what you face. And in some ways it's very, very similar. But again, you're gonna let me find my this can be just about as difficult to deal with. Some of you might not be dealing with narcissism at home, but you are dealing with narcissism in the workplace. And it doesn't have to be leadership. It can be underneath leadership. But these are going to be the people who promote themselves. You are not truly going to be valued. They are not truly team players. They might say that they are, but they're not. It's really all about them. Bottom line, it's all about them. Obviously, many of them are attracted to positions of high leadership, the CEOs, attorneys, doctors, clergy, managers, professors. But these are the people who tend to abuse power. They can be the bullies in the workplace. They can be the ones that create the hostile work environments. And it can be very subtle. Again, this can be the sandpaper kind of thing, where it just takes a toll on you a little at a time. Because when we find ourselves underneath people like this, you know over time that you really don't matter in the scheme of things. Now, if I need you to look good, or if I want to steal your work or your ideas or use you to do my bidding, fine and dandy, you're my best buddy. Or if in the workplace I need to recruit flying monkeys, people who will support me no matter how bad I am, then there are always people you can suck in that will think that you're marvelous, even if you're not. And that'll happen. They want the attention, they'll go to great lengths to get it. Even if they have to step on you, they feel entitled. They believe in their own insight, their own power, their own way of doing things, and they'll do what they can to do that. They're hard. Obviously, lacking that empathy, they're not going to understand what it's like for you to deal with them, and it really doesn't matter to them. If you have personal problems, that's not going to matter anyway. They really are not good teachers. They're not good mentors. I would not have wanted to grow up as a professional underneath someone like that, because they're not about you succeeding. As a matter of fact, because narcissists like to be the best at something, if you actually do something better than they do, it threatens them to the core. And they will take whatever measures they can to do something about you. Just in the interest of time, because I gave you this, I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time on this because technically we have 5 minutes. And I do want to get to looking at just for a few moments. What are some of the things that you can't change? They do not understand who they are. I think one of the greatest insights that you can carry away from this is that they don't see it. They don't understand it. That's one of the things that's characteristic about personality disorders that you think, how can they not see it? It's because it developed early on. It coalesces into who they are. It's all they know. And so they're just being who they are. They don't have a clue that it is as pathological as it is. And even if you explain it, it's going to miss. You're not going to get anywhere. Typically, you're not going to get anywhere. When we think of whether this is treatable, if you have younger people or people that are on the lower end of the spectrum and they have a little insight into it and they're willing to work on it, then there's a little bit of hope to do that. Especially if they have not really grown up yet, that works. But if you have adults who have lived their whole life this way, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but they usually don't show up for treatment. They're not going to come in and say, guess what? I'm a narcissist. Not going to happen. Other people seek treatment because they're in pain. They're not in pain. You're in pain. You will probably seek treatment because you're in a relationship with them that they are not. And if they do show up, it's typically because they become depressed. If their world sort of falls apart, or things don't go the way they want, or something goes wrong that messes with their world, they can become depressed, and then they will show up. Medication typically doesn't help except to treat symptoms like depression. When they get older, it can be even worse because they have not cultivated a social network of people that will help them as they get older. They can be alone, they can be miserable, but they usually don't seek treatment. They lack insight and self-reflection. We've talked about that. It's not there. It's not about you. They're very well defended. No matter what you talk to them about, they're going to have an excuse for it. They're going to be able to explain it in a way that is consistent with them. It's going to make sense in their world. It's going to make sense in yours, and you're not going to get anywhere with that. Unlikely to change. We have to have realistic expectations. Sometimes our expectations are higher than we can achieve. And I think becoming more versed in this disorder, if you really think that's what you're dealing with in somebody's life, that can help you because it helps solidify within us that it's not us. And never make your self-worth dependent on them. They cannot give you what typical human beings give you in the give and take of life. It's not going to come from them. They are not going to reflect your value, your worth, because it's all about them. They're not going to be able to pay you compliments, but you certainly can compliment them. Even with children, they typically will not compliment the child. They will brag about their children to everybody else. Oh, these are my children. Let me tell you about my children and what they did. But they don't tell the child. Or they might brag about you. You're a wonderful wife. You're a wonderful cook. You're a wonderful whatever. They are not going to tell you. And so you end up in the pain. But it's really about making themselves look good, whether it's on Facebook or with friends or coworkers or whatever. But if your self-worth is dependent upon them, you're in trouble. What things can change? Number one, we can break our denial. I think sometimes, and that's what I've seen happen in my niece. What things can change? Number one, we can break our denial. I think sometimes, and that's what I've seen happen in my niece. When this thing first, I would just be in horror on the phone when she would be talking to me and crying in the evenings, and I'm thinking, he said, what? He would literally tell her she was worthless. Or, you will never be able to make the kind of money that I do. You'll never be able to this, and you'll never be able to that. And, even little things that were so demeaning. Doesn't matter. But she was blaming herself. She had learned to blame herself. Maybe if I did this, maybe if I'd only done that. Maybe if I had cleaned the house. Maybe if I had, and she was a great stay-at-home mom. And he told her she didn't dress nice enough and she didn't keep the house clean enough. Very common complaints. And there was really no reason to get a divorce other than narcissism. Made perfect sense to me, but it didn't to her. It's starting to make more perfect sense to her. But breaking that denial, like, what am I dealing with here? Now, it's kind of like Pandora's box. Once you start to see it in this way, it's like getting a different set of glasses. You might never be able to put all this stuff back in Pandora's box. You might never see this person that you are relating to quite the same again. Does that mean you have to leave them? No, it doesn't. Hopefully that would even give you some distance, emotional distance, to say, wait a minute, hopefully this will take away some of the power they have to hurt me. I can stay with you because I see you in a different light. But breaking our denial about what's going on. It's not about you. You've lived a life of blame. It's always been your fault. It's not about you. Even though every time you've been told it's about you, it's your fault, etc. Understanding where they're coming from, getting that education, and then treating them with compassion. It's hard to, thankfully I am treated better than what I deserve many times. I think that's in our humanness. Hopefully we learn to treat each other better than we deserve sometimes. And in a situation like this, it isn't deserved. But seeing somebody with eyes of compassion. I use an illustration of attending a workshop in New York that was about child abuse. The woman who spoke in the morning talked about victims. The man who spoke in the afternoon talked about working with sexual offenders. I don't remember much of anything about what was talked about in the morning. I will never forget, and this was 25 years ago up in New York, I will never forget what a guy named Nicholas Groth said about working with sexual offenders. It was one of the most compassionate talks I've ever heard about seeing people as human beings, regardless of what they put out, regardless of what they live. Now, that doesn't mean, and he said, this is a heinous crime. Make no mistake. I am not talking about condoning any part of it, but these are human beings. And I went, wow. And I've never forgotten that. And I think even from this standpoint, truly, if you have a narcissistic personality disorder, it's very sad. It's very sad what's happened to you. It's a very sad way to live. It might look like it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it's very sad. Say what you need. Because they lack empathy, they don't know what you need. They don't know what you want. They're not paying any attention because it's all about them. So you have to say what you need. You have to set those boundaries if you need to. You might explain how it would benefit them. Everybody loves you. So I think it would be great if you came with me to this gathering at so-and-so's house. Because they're going to be looking for you. They love to have you there. So it's somehow making it look like they can make some kind of contribution. And it's, in a sense, that's a little bit of manipulation yourself. But if you're trying to stay in a relationship with someone, you sometimes have to play the game. And I firmly believe that especially with people who have lived this kind of thing for many years, you might have been in a relationship like this for 40 years. Now isn't necessarily the time to get out. You've paid your dues. Your lifestyle might not be that great if you do that. So when you look at that whole package deal, there might be a better way for you to simply stay. So sometimes we have to learn in situations we can't get out of how to deal with it. I mean, that includes work situations. You might not be able to divorce your boss or your supervisor or somebody who drives you nuts at work, but there are ways that we can find to deal with it and not personalize it as much as we do. Develop relationships with other people. As I was saying before, don't make your self-esteem dependent on them because they'll never be able to give that to you. But other relationships with other people can be supportive and meaningful. and hopefully we all have those. And find some humor in it. These are two little sick jokes. Just stupid. How many narcissists does it take to screw in a light bulb? And none because they get the menials to do it for them. And one because they hold the light bulb and the rest of the world revolves around them. But I believe personally that humor, and I've often said this as a professional, I think about things deeply, and I'm affected deeply. If I didn't have a sense of humor to offset that, I'd probably be dead. Because you just deal with so many difficult things in life and how hard life is to live sometimes, that a sense of humor saves me. And many times if we can look at it, it's kind of like the flying monkeys. My niece and I have had a great time talking about the flying monkeys because it takes some of the power out of it and it helps you understand it. And it's funny. So those are some of the things that we can change. That's not an exhaustive list. And the last thing I want us to think about is when you think about making changes in our lives, many times, especially when you have been deeply affected by someone who is narcissistic and self-centered, what am I afraid of? Considering what I'm afraid of. Am I afraid of the criticism or ridicule? Failing in the relationship? Might not be the first relationship you're in, and you might be thinking, I don't want to fail again. It might not be you failing, it might be selection error. And you might need to make another selection and not make the same error. But we have to identify what keeps me stuck and from making changes. Am I afraid of real intimacy or commitment, so I'll stay with a bad situation rather than risking another? And I don't want you to get me wrong. I am somebody who leans pretty heavily on the side of we are too used to throwing away relationships. We just ditch people at the drop of a hat. I don't think it's good. Because we don't stay long enough to learn how to communicate. We don't stay in relationships sometimes long enough to learn how to resolve conflict. We just run. After the honeymoon is over, it's like, this isn't working out for me. I'm out of here. So I am somebody that's more commitment-oriented because I think that allows us to change as people. One of the greatest factors that mediates against self-centeredness, long-term relationships, marriage. Because you have to learn to give and take, or hopefully. Fear of grieving the loss. I don't want to let go. Having something is better than nothing. Fear of being alone. Many people are terrified of being alone. And I would rather be in this bad situation than be alone. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of that confrontation. Oh man, I don't want to take this on. What's it going to be like? And I have to tell you, divorcing a genius narcissist has been an education for me to watch what my niece is going through and to watch the text messages and the choices of words and the manipulation and the holy cow that she's going through. So fear of that confrontation, fear of not having anything else. It's better than nothing. And what do I do with my life after? So that's obviously not an exhaustive list. But when we're making decisions about things in our life that might need to change, how do we also give this consideration? Because even if we choose to rock the boat a little, that's fear-producing because rocking the boat unbalances that system, and who knows what we're in for. So coming to grips with our own fear is part of the challenge of change. Now, in the interest of time, we're a little bit over. And I hope this has given you just a taste of what it's like and offered a few challenges. And I'm glad you're here. I wish we had time to share some of the thoughts that you have. I would be glad to stick around. If anybody has questions or something like that, I'd be glad. But I also want to give those of you, we promised you an hour. Those of you who need to leave, feel free. We're not going to stay a whole lot longer anyway, but don't worry about it. Let's just take a second here. And if anybody needs to go, you go. And then we'll think about questions.